I think it's really, really important to separate company vision from product pitch mentally, and to really treat those two things as very, very distinct. When you talk about like what's the vision for the company, that's your pitch towards your team, that's where you're going, that's where you're aligning the company towards. It's your pitch to investors and so on. It's what you use to like motivate yourself every day, and that's why this thing should exist. That's very, very different from we solved this problem.
Today's episode is about the importance of positioning during the early days of startup building and why a positioning that is too ambitious too early can be very dangerous. Our guest today is Simon Rohrbach, a former designer, including head of design at Deliveroo, turned co-founder and CEO of Plane.com, the fastest, most powerful support platform for company-to-company collaboration. To date, Plane has raised over 20 million from the likes of Index and Battery Ventures. With that, welcome, Simon. It's wonderful to have you on.
Thank you.
So today, Plane is the fastest, most powerful support platform for company-to-company collaboration. That wasn't always the case, though. So what was Plane's initial positioning when you got started?
Well, thank you for having me again. So we actually started life as an API-first customer support platform. So if you imagine something like Stripe for customer support, that's kind of what we started the company trying to build. And the reason behind that was, before starting this company, me and my co-founder Matt had worked together at Deliveroo, a food delivery company, very focused on sort of Europe, EMEA. And I joined the company fairly early on. I joined it when I was like 10 people, so I grew out to around 2,000 people 5 years later. And ended up leading the design team, building and leading the design team there. It was the first hire on tech. So just this really, really fun, really interesting journey. And we also kind of saw how customer support grew from I think it was a Zendesk instance that we had installed. It just grew into this sort of massive beast, right? As the company grew. And we were using Zendesk in a way that it shouldn't really be used, right? We're really kind of using it more as kind of like this API layer that's giving us all kind of the basic constructs of customer support, like what's a ticket, what's an agent, what are all the workflows, what's an email from a customer, like all these sort of things. And we would build our own tooling on top of that, right? We build our own internal tools, our own UIs, because that's for us where a lot of the value was, in kind of customizing it to our needs. So we saw that and we were like, it feels like there's something there, because Zendesk wasn't built for that really. And we would speak to other people and oh yeah, we are doing the same thing. We are sort of using as a sort of API. So it just made a lot of sense to us that this is a problem that we should solve. So we kind of started building the business around that, building an API first customer support platform. That's kind of how we started. And what was interesting about it was the sort of positioning that intuitively made a lot of sense to people. We would explain it to people and they would say, oh yeah, this API first, that sounds great. Like Stripe for customer support, oh my God, love it. That's amazing. And we're able to
I'm sure investors love this as well. I'm sure.
Oh, for sure. It actually made it it was one of these ideas that on paper just totally adds up. And then so we actually, I think, probably found it quite easy, I think, to raise some funds, get a small round together. So we're just really, really excited to actually dive in and start working on this. So it was the sort of thing that everyone sort of agreed with, was that makes sense. That's the next big moment in customer support. Everything's moving towards APIs. Everything's becoming API first. We had this blog post actually that we would quote in a fundraising deck from, I think it was Segment, when they were explaining their transition to API first, and they had this really beautiful quote of talking about, if you product as an API, your customers are never limited, and they're never locked in. Whatever use cases they might have, they can build on top of it however they want. We were that totally is how we think of this, and we've seen this firsthand. So yeah, we started kind of really going after this API first sort of focus, and we sort of realized over sort of the course, let's say, of 2 years, fairly lonely and hard 2 years, that this just wasn't. It was a really bad market. It made for a really hard product to build, and it was one of these ideas that on paper made a lot of sense, but in practice didn't add up at all. And I'd say there's sort of 2 or 3 different reasons for this. The first reason is it's API first is the slowest and most expensive way to build anything, right? So when you think about sort of the typical startup advice of, build super quick, MVP, get it out there, like just get it done, validate quickly, right? Like it's the slowest way to validate something, because when you build API first, you can't just like give someone an API first prototype really and have to like adopt it, implement it, like because people have to write a code against it, right? It's a big lift to actually do that. So there's this sort of big like sort of thing of like, you can't just like fake it. You can't just like give someone like a UI that's like, a random like prototype under the hood or doesn't even work, whatever. Like you have to give them the real thing. So then you're stuck in this place where you're a bit like, okay, we have to build a real API first customer support platform, which is a huge lift. You're building Zendesk by API first. So the scope of that is massive. And all your internals are exposed, right? And if you're API first, it means actually like the developer experience is actually what you're selling. You're not selling API first, you're selling a great developer experience. And the great developer experience, again, is slow and expensive to achieve. So that was sort of the first problem. Second problem is the moment you say customer support platform, everyone goes like, okay, great. So that means you do multi-tier SLAs, right? And presumably you have coverage for different time zones, because we actually have a follow the sun rotation on our 50-person support team. So presumably you can also support that. And ideally translation will also be good because our support is multilingual. So immediately, like beyond even like, talking about any of the basics of like parsing an email and showing it to you, which is already complex enough, you're talking about all this other stuff on top. All API first, right? So then you have this compounding problem of like, okay, the table stakes are huge. But on top of that, we're building them in the slowest, most expensive way, where we have to like really show everything from the get-go rather than like being able to fake it. So what you're stuck with is this sort of thing that's actually really hard to validate. Like, will anyone actually buy? Will anyone actually use it? So that's kind of what we ended up kind of like, sort of in this sort of doom cycle of like building, no one really buying. Even everyone was like, oh, that makes so much sense. I love this idea. And being stuck in this kind of cycle of like, what's our way out of this? That was a really kind of, I think, hard sort of period for us.
One of the things that you told me that stuck with me is also, right, during the discovery calls, as you said, everyone said this is a great idea, including customers, right? They were nodding towards the actual discovery calls. But then when it came to buying it, the response was always, this takes too much engineering resources and we just don't have the time to do it.
Yes, exactly. The sort of the objections we would face were two or threefold. First one was, it's not the right time. It's a big lift, big project, engineering's busy with other stuff. So we had this weird thing where we're like, well, but there's all these API first businesses where people write code and are happy to write code. Like if you tell someone like, hey, we're going to implement Stripe, they go like, great, let's implement Stripe. Like I'm excited about that, like, so why aren't people excited about implementing an API first customer support platform? So that was the first challenge. The second challenge was that people would go, okay, it doesn't have all the things that I need. So it would be this sort of like this sort of feature gap issue. And the third one was, but like I still need UI because, we don't have capacity right now to like build all this UI ourselves. So like the API is great. We love it. But we still need a great UI on top. So more people said that they liked wasn't actually what in the end they needed, right? And I'd say the first one of the ones that I mentioned is actually the biggest problem. Like that's like the one that kills you, because if the way you position your product is finally it's possible for engineers to write more code and do things programmatically that like so far the company has been used to being able to do in a UI. When you say it that way, right? Like what you're pitching is like, oh, engineers write more code, which like from like sort of, if you take a step back, is a really stupid proposition. That just makes no sense. Like no company in history of ever was successful with a pitch that said write more code. Everyone wants to write less code faster, right? Like do things that are currently hard with a lot of code with less code faster. So we sort of tried to shift our positioning towards, okay, we actually make it easier for you to do some of the things that are really hard to do today programmatically with something like this. But the problem they end up with there is the specific problems, the specific sort of interaction points engineering has with a topic or domain that customers support, they're like sort of flashpoints. It's not consistent, right? It's like we have to do this one integration, and that one integration is where every engineer complains, go like, this is horrible. The DX is horrible. I don't like this. This is like annoying. And it's hard to work with. Now, like, and that's what we'd hear on all these discovery calls, that like, I hate it, don't like it, and so on. But that would be a couple of weeks, and then like they would leave customer support alone, and customer support will kind of do their thing with the integration that they now finally have, and everyone kind of go back to like BAU. So it wasn't this sort of like ongoing constant problem where you had all these companies spending all of this time building, like just building on top of this the entire time, and realized the companies that did that were like 5. Were like Deliveroo, Uber Eats, DoorDash, Monzo, and maybe a couple of others, that like actually had the capacity edgewise to spend time on something like this. So I think that's kind of realized there was where the law of head nods, horrible market, really hard to build product.
I do always smarter in hindsight. Maybe looking back though, and sticking with kind of the early days when that's what you were trying to sell. Could you have done anything to validate as to whether customers would be willing to buy this much earlier in the process? So you hadn't gone down of building all of it and then running into the issue that, right, they're still nodding their heads, but they just don't want to put any resources towards it.
Yes, 100%. In retrospect, I think there's probably 3 things I would do differently today, and that we learned. I think the first thing is the words that you say in terms of the category that you describe really matter. Like, and I can't overstate this enough. Like they really have an impact on what people expect from you. When you say you're a customer support platform, people think of the closest mental model of like a customer support platform. They think of Zendesk, right? And they think of Intercom. And these are companies with huge moats that they've been around for 10 years. So inevitably from the off, you get compared to a company that has a 10-year head start on you. Whereas instead, if you said, we're a really great API for parsing emails, if the problem that you have is like your emails in, and we present them to you in like a really nice UI, very simply, suddenly you unlock all these use cases of something that's actually quite adjacent. It's something that will help ladder up to a customer support platform eventually. Isn't the full thing right now, but you've massively reduced the scope. And suddenly the thing you can compare to is like, okay, like email parsing is my problem. Who else solves that problem? Okay, there's maybe a couple of others, but like you can go and solve that problem really well because it's so much smaller in scope. So I would describe it differently today. Like what actually like literally cuts the idea down to a single percentage point of what our vision is, and just try and sell that. And sell that with the API first angle and see where that takes us, right? Because then this way you can validate API first. You can validate that's the thing that people will integrate. But it might lead you actually maybe in a slightly different path, but that's not a bad thing because it still leads you towards a business, and that's the end goal, is to have a business. And so I would definitely do that differently. Is to kind of like sort of cut down the scope quite significantly. That's the first thing I do differently.
This is part of a broader theme we had discussed before, which is, right, on one hand, founders always get told to have a gigantic vision, including from investors, like we're very guilty of this. But on the other hand, you feel very strongly about having a very broad, big vision early on. It's actually one of the most dangerous things that startups can do. So maybe if we can unpack that a little bit more, just a framework of how we think about it in this context.
Yeah, I think on that first point, I think that really gets you. Because as you say, right, like you have to do a big vision. That's why you start a company. And I think it's really, really important to separate company vision from product pitch mentally, and to really treat those 2 things as very, very distinct. When you talk about like what's the vision for the company, that's your pitch towards your team. That's where you're going. That's where you're aligning the company towards. It might even like find its way into your sales pitch to customers occasionally. It's your pitch to investors and so on. It's what you use to like motivate yourself every day, and that's why this thing should exist, right? That's very, very different from we solved this problem. And what I see a lot of people do, and what we did as well, is we describe the end state. The end state of the company is that we solve every problem there is to be solved in customer support. We are the best customer support platform by far. Like, we rule the world, right? And again, you sort of like, you fall into that trap of like, okay, like, you're setting yourself up for failure because you can't deliver on that promise right away. So the sort of the big sort of mental unblock for us was in actually almost kind of like letting go of that vision and going like, we're not going to do that. We're not going to be this API first support platform for literally everyone and solve all these problems. We're actually going to like do the opposite. We're going to be really unambitious. We're going to go for like a really small market, one that most people say is too small, and do a really great job for them. Because like that's better than what we are today, which is we have this big vision and we have nothing. At least then we have the small vision, we have something, which is better. So I think that's kind of like a big step that we're encouraging everyone to make, is like, take the vision, put it somewhere safe, like always come back to it. And then like disconnect it from like what you say on your next customer call, and make that the smallest thing possible.
You said you spent about 2 years, kind of 2 very lonely years building, not really getting any traction. I'm sure you got signals quite early that you weren't on to the right thing, but nevertheless, it's very hard to then actually pull the plug basically on the original positioning and changing it. What eventually got you over the line, and how do you go kind of about that process of actually being honest with yourself that this wasn't working?
I think one part of it was rational, where you can make the argument that like for an MVP in a high table stakes market, I think table stakes is something that like I'd encourage everyone to think about, because I think that really determines, okay, like what's sort of the floor for like getting an MVP out the door, really, right? And then I encourage everyone to be like very intellectually honest with themselves on what the table stakes actually are. Because, we thought our table stakes were like SLAs and like time to support and all these things, and it's actually not. Like, what is it actually, right? So one part of it is rational, which is, okay, how long do we think is reasonable to like get an MVP at the door? We gotta give ourselves a year, right? Like, okay, like a year, like build. We've seen that before from lots of the companies that have done very well. That's like the reasonable sort of like, you can excuse that, right? It's a long time, but you can excuse it. It goes against the Y Combinator advice of like literally launch yesterday, right? But still, we sort of were like, we're seasoned people, like we've done this before, like we know what we're doing. There was a bit of like hubris there, like for sure. So we give ourselves the year, and then we're like, okay, like after it's not working, let's give ourselves like, sort of 3-6 months to like really crack to go to market, because it must be down to how we sell this, and must be down to that. So then you spend 6 months working on like how we sell this, and go like, still not getting there. And sort of you get to the end of year 2 and go like, okay, like, so we've built a lot of stuff. We've tried to improve on how we sell it. And it's still not working. What gives? Like, something like, you have this kind of like moment where you look yourself in the mirror and you go like, this is not like, this can't be it. So I think that was kind of that first moment, like time horizon wise, it stopped no longer making sense. The first thing, that's the first thing. The second thing I'd say was our sort of relationship as co-founders was starting to like really suffer from the pressure, because you carry this huge weight on your shoulders of like, you raised this money, there's all these expectations on you, and sort of like, that you also have on yourself. And we just staring down the barrel of like, we had started this really enjoying and loving working together, and increasingly things got really tense because we were like, what's going wrong? I'm doing my job badly? Is Matt, my co-founder, doing his job badly? Like, you start having these sorts of like sort of conversations, and you start looking for like the reason why it's not working. And so you end up looking this kind of then this fork in the road where you're basically looking at, well, if we continue like this, this is just not going to work. Like this might actually kill the company. Because if it kills the relationship, it kills the company. So either we go down that path and we change something, and we want the company to exist, so we have to change something, right? So what's like the next less painful option? The next less painful option is to give up on your vision and go, okay, we need to reconfigure how we do this. And the thing we then applied was like, well, what are customers telling us that they like about what a product is today? And what are we maybe not hearing? And like, what are they saying to us, but what are we not hearing? And that's when we realized there was this sort of subsegment of a couple of like sort of early design partners that we had and people we're talking to. We're like, we love the API first approach. Like, that's really cool. But we actually talk to our customers on Slack. And we talk to our customers on Microsoft Teams and like all these channels. We love the API first thing. Again, it's great, but like, we just love it if like you build these channel integrations for us. And we're like, who are these companies that like were sort of saying that, you know? And they were all developer tools. And we're like, that makes sense. And we actually started going through this process of thinking, okay, we're not succeeding at like selling this vision that we have. We have to sell to people like ourselves. We have to like speak our own, we have to like, we know our own language, you know, what we want from like a tool like this. So what do we want? Like, what will we, if we had to sell to ourselves, what would we sell? What could we use today? And what are we? We are a developer tool. Like, that's literally like what the company is. So let's go and sell to developer tools because they all speak our language, they all are like us. And that's kind of, that really unlocked something, which like just deciding, let's sell to ourselves. Let's not try and sell to the deliveries of the world, even though that was kind of the genesis of this idea. Let's sell to ourselves. And I think that was a big unlock for us in the end.
Are there any specific frameworks you used, or like you just removed yourself from everything and went somewhere, or like what are ways that work for you during this tough time that I eventually led you to actually be able to articulate or change your positioning and then because when you're so deep in the weeds, it's very hard to actually even listen to some of the signals from your customers that you don't even necessarily want to hear. So like, what helped you guys during that period as a way to get to that realization?
It started being when we would talk to customers or like prospects, I guess, you know, people we would talk to. And they would say the words like, oh, if you guys solve that, I'll pay for that, without us asking. Right. So like the conversation kind of lead to this place where they'll go like, oh, like, yeah, like I talk to a lot of customers on Slack. If you guys had a solution for that, or honestly, like I'd pay for it right now, because it's a bit of like a nightmare for me. And it was this sort of throwaway comment, and then a couple of people mentioned that. I was like, okay, like we've never heard that before. Like no one said like, oh, if you guys built a better API first product, I would pay for that. Like no one said that. So that was the first thing. It was that kind of like people naturally volunteer that. So that's the first sort of check mark I would look for. Like, do people naturally volunteer? Oh, if you solve that, I'll pay for it. The second thing I think is similar, which is if you do discovery call, right? And the common advice is like, oh, do discovery calls, like do interviews and things like that. In a great test actually came from like a friend of mine who was building her startup at the time. And she did like super well with it, also kind of in the support space. I asked her like, how did you get your first customers? And she said to me, I would do these customer interviews. And then like, obviously, because, you know, you want to do this properly and not bias people, you wouldn't actually say like what exactly you're building until like the very end. And at the very end, people go like, oh, so, you know, what do you think of building? And she would briefly describe it in 2 or 3 sentences. And then people go like, oh, that actually sounds like really interesting. Can we like learn more about this? Like, because there's actually like a problem we're trying to solve right now. So that for me was a great signal of like, okay, if you jump on like an interview or discovery call, and by the end, without you trying to sell, people go like, oh, like, can I learn more about this? Like, are you guys available right now? Like, you know, can I go and check it out? If you get that, that's like, that's gold right there. And really you have to kind of be quite rigorous with yourself and kind of go, if you're not hearing that consistently, like a drum beat, end of every call, you don't have it yet. You don't have it. And so like today I'd keep going until you get to that point and just describe it differently every time and see when it clicks. Like refocus on how you describe it and see when it clicks.
Insights like this, as basic as it sounds, is also why I encourage all the founders to actually use an AI transcriber for all the customer discovery calls that they use, because that then allows you to go back and actually, when you have the kind of the mental clarity and space to go back and actually ask these kind of questions across calls, because a lot of times you won't remember that people actually said that, right? Because as you said, it's kind of a side sentence at some point during the conversation.
Exactly. And I think the third thing that maybe, briefly add was like, I think for a lot of product founders, the thing what doesn't maybe come as sort of second nature is describing something that you have no intention to build right now, and that would take amount of time to build. And we didn't do that, like we sort of were like, no, like we have to be able to show it, and it has to be real, and it has to be all of that. And I think sort of a bit of like hustle on that side, I think is really healthy in terms of just going like, we have this thing, it's really great, it's available today. And then when customers kind of go like, oh great, like kind of trying to like, oh actually we're really busy with onboarding calls for like the next couple of weeks, but like perhaps like so the end of the month, like you can play like that. And I think it's okay to do that. Like I think it gives you like a signal on like, look at there's something here. So I'm less big on sort of like frameworks in traditional sense. I'm much more focused now on like, what are the emotional signals someone's giving you that like this is a problem that they have.
Did a lot of these comments around what they would actually pay for come from customers that you had engaged with over that year and a half period and kind of consistently checked in? Or was it more just you continuously introducing or trying to get in front of new customers and eventually realized it's like the strive for customer support got you in calls, but it just didn't lead anywhere? So was it from that, or like where did these signals actually come from?
Early on with our first couple of sort of customers, the signals sort of came from like, we found one or two companies that like were willing to like forgive a lot of shortcomings in the product because they realigned with the way the product worked. Like they saw something there. And off the back of that, we then managed to like, we had a bit more credibility and be like, oh, like, this company's using us. And suddenly like you find it easier to kind of get into conversations in a bit more of a sales context, because people get curious about like, oh, how is this company using you? And so you get to talk about that. And I think that's where, I think that for me is the beginning of that sort of flywheel of, once you have that one use case, you can talk about the use case. And you can like credibly, like, it's like a case study, right? You can like, that's how they're using us. And then you very quickly might realize that like, okay, like there's one, if I can find one, there's probably two. And then you talk to like the second company and you use the words of the first customer, how they describe your product, to describe it to them. And you might see some heads nodding, like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And, we could really see ourselves using that. And this company clearly knows what they're doing. They use it. So like, we like that too. And it kind of gives you that validation. And then with the third, you merge together what the first two told you and you use their words, right, to like describe it to the third. So it kind of becomes this sort of like, sort of flywheel where like every conversation you have makes the next conversation better with more precise wording. And so I really kind of like, to encourage people to like, the moment you have that, just try like iterate with, again, every next call, try the positioning slightly differently. And it's okay to like use like, big words. It's like, it's the customer support platform for companies like you. It's the customer support platform for like developer tools, for API companies, for infra companies. There's many different ways to play the exact same thing. And then you can also like build off that. You can kind of go like, oh, when I say that, like, what does that make you think? And the more would you ideally want from something like this? Like sort of what's the ideal state of a product like that? And that teaches you again a lot about like what people expect when you say those words, and whether that's something you can use in your marketing going forward.
So maybe to make it very tangible, after you moved away from like the strive for customer support, what did you actually land on in terms of the positioning of Plain?
We went through, I'd say, 2 or 3 iterations. First one after that was support for developer tools. An API first was kind of the first subheading, if you will. It was kind of like build API first, super extensible. The second thing was like, super high quality, like great UI, super fast. And the third thing I think was like works in the channels that you already use with your customers, because we were realizing that channels were like sort of a big thing. So that was kind of the first sort of iteration, really focused on like the vertical. And that was great because every developer tool company suddenly would talk to us and they go like, oh, this is for us, and just like that feeling of like, this is for us, I think is a really big deal. Like it's totally, even if like under the hood, you have a lot of functionality that could be repurposed for like much broader segments of customers, it's totally okay and great to say like, this is for you, for you only. Because all you need is you just need to get to the next stage. That's all it needs to do for you. Don't think about the steps beyond that yet. Like there's no need for like a big master plan. So that was kind of the first iteration. The second iteration then was realized what we're actually describing was technical support. Because developer tools do technical support. And so we kind of were trying to figure out, okay, like how do we say that? Is it like it's the support tool for technical support, or it's a technical support platform or something to that effect, or is it support for engineers? So we tried support for engineers. We realized, in a lot of companies, especially bigger ones, it's no longer just engineers that do support. It's, support is technical, but it's not engineers themselves that do the support. So we settled on sort of technical support platform as like the thing. And that sort of got us into, let's say, a lot of conversations with companies. We realized, hold on a second, like technical support doesn't just exist in DevTools. It also exists in very large enterprises where there's an internal support team doing technical support for like their colleagues, right? And all of that happens over Slack. So we started selling into companies like that, thanks to the technical support messaging. So we realized there was sort of big difference between describing an industry, developer tools, or a vertical, versus describing a use case, technical support, or a type of use, right? So it's the second iteration. The third iteration was B2B support. And that's sort of the most recent one until recently, like where we sort of realized this market is obviously way, way bigger. And so far, the technical support messaging has been good for us. It's helped us. But it also holds you back because you end up talking to customers. They go like, I love what you're doing, but it says it's technical support. Is it for me? Because I'm the head of customer success at a less technical company. So it feels like it's maybe built for engineers. And so we started shifting away from that. I can talk a bit more about sort of what we're going to do going forward.
Tell us what are you doing going forward, and then we can dive in on both the advantages of going broader versus the challenges. Because if you go too broad too soon, right, that also causes a lot of problems because you lose the focus that gets you in the door in the first place.
I think, through this process of these different iterations, we become a big fan. I've become a big believer of like being very, very simple in your messaging, being very like straight up, like we are for developer tools, we are for technical support, we are for this thing. The moment you decide to go more broad, you realize that you're taking that specificity away, right? Like inevitably, like it goes hand in hand. You remove, we are for technical support. So what are you for? All of B2B. But like, how is that then different from everyone else who's for B2B? Like the broader you go, the more competition you have, right? And the bigger sort of your comparative step. So what was happening, we'd go into demo calls with customers that would be running like side-by-side evaluation of like us and a couple of other tools. And we would realize the problem is now everyone says the same thing. Everyone moved on to the same thing. They're seeing the same shift. And that's the sign of like a great market that's happening. If everyone's seeing the same shift, you're at it. Like that's the market to go for. So we're seeing it happening. We're realizing we are losing deals off the back of the conversation becoming about features. The conversation literally becoming about, they do this, do you have that? You do this, do they have that? Literally, like you go through, like people send the Excel spreadsheets and kind of go like, tick, 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 do you do this or yes or no? And this is how you lose. That's how every company loses if you get into a feature contest. And so realizing the power that we had, our positioning, we had taken away by going more broad. So we needed to replace it with something that lets us show up to a call and say, here's our unique perspective, where support is going. And we came up with this thing that we call customer collaboration. And that's something I believe in very, very deeply. So the thing we're focusing on now is collaborative support, collaborative company-to-company support. And the story behind it is very simply that like support is changing from like email and chat and these siloed kind of channels that are wrapped into like a ticket and the sort of really transactional relationship that you have where like you exchange emails with someone at a company. It's changing from that to this really collaborative type of support that's fundamentally company to company. It's many to many, right? It's like your team is on Slack with the customer's team. And there's many people that see the message being exchanged and can jump in, and every thread is like has multiple participants and so on. It's really collaborative. Like it's really like back and forth and like, you know, hey, like let me pull an engineering team to fix this bug for you. And like, yeah, we've now fixed it. Just like, you know. And there's a great story to be told about that shift happening. It's a really wonderful thing. It means that like, you know, internally there's more collaboration happening between the support team, the success team, the engineering team. All these are kind of merging together, especially driven by AI. But also companies are getting closer to other companies. Like I think vendor relationships have never been closer, thanks to the shift. And a great way to tell that story is it's becoming really collaborative. And our view is, you know, we're not just a support platform, we're building a collaboration platform. Then who doesn't want collaboration? And so like now I think it's really about just sort of like building that category in the same way that, for example, Webflow made, you know, no code thing, right? Like I think we have the same opportunity here.
Did you have any challenges right early on? Because when you went from technical support to just B2B support in general, right, you didn't have the kind of the new category that you're looking to define yet. Right, you were one of many B2B support tools at that point, and I lost a little bit of your edge. Like what were some of the challenges and learnings from going from something that is a little bit more narrow and focused to something that could be very broad and generic? And maybe even about the question, would you do it again, or would you stick with technical maybe a little bit longer than you actually have, because that gives you an edge for one specific type of customer? Because one of the, like, from our point of view as an investor, what we see too often, unfortunately, is companies get to $1 million or $2 million in revenue, and rather than rinsing and repeating and becoming the best for one specific ICP, they go too broad too soon. And once you're everything to everyone, you're nothing to no one anymore. That's where a lot of companies that kind of flatline when it comes to revenue progress. So not everyone makes it to the other side, but it then starts to almost like create their own new category.
I think it's important to go into something like this knowing that like category creation is not just something you stick on your homepage and like then everyone goes like, you know, that's the new Gartner Magic Quadrant, that category I'm looking at. It's not how it works.
It'd be nice.
It would be great. I'd love that. You know,
Yeah.
like love to talk to analysts tomorrow and kind of go like, you know, how we are like, yeah, in the upper quadrant. So like that's like a concerted long-term effort, right? But it takes consistency. That's how you get there. Like you have to like consistently kind of like drop these seeds of like, you know, we're building a collaborative platform. Like you can even say it that way. You can start by saying like we're a collaborative customer support platform. You don't have to like immediately kind of go to customer collaboration or something like that. So I think it's important to realize that's a long-term endeavor. With all that said, would I drop the technical bit again? 100%. Because it's important to realize when the market is happening, and our market is happening now. Like it's, you know, we've been at this for a few years. It's never been more intense and more exciting than right now. Like the amount of capital that's being deployed into the space, especially driven through AI, the amount of like vendors that are like getting ripped and replaced, like incumbents left, right, and center. Because there's sort of this big shift in both channels, but also a big shift towards AI. Like everything's being turned on its head. And I think it's very, very important to realize like when focus is like a tool in your toolkit, and a thing you can deploy to your advantage. And then focus just means that you're looking down in front of your feet, when actually you should be like looking ahead. And I think for me, it became the realization that like, if we stay too focused for longer, we'll just be like, we'll have a tiny corner of a market that was happening right in front of our eyes that we were excellently positioned to go and take. And I'd much rather do that play than going like, cool, we built like a nice little business that exists but isn't winning.
It's hard to put it into anything very specific, right? At what point should you drop the narrow focus and go broader? In your specific case, what were signals that give you the confidence that this is not a right time to kind of drop the focus and lose that advantage and go much broader and kind of go for the much bigger vision?
It's when people have a great match with your product. So you talk to people, and when you go through the requirements and you have to, again, be intellectually honest with yourself on how they're going to use your product. You see them get into the product and you see them use it in the exact same way that your best customers do. And you see them fully adopt it and be excited by it, but you see them held back by what you said it was. They kind of come to you like, I'm not sure this is, I love it, but like, I'm just worried that like, you guys are going to go down this super technical route and then like I have to get engineers involved and everything to like help me do stuff. And like, no, like that's not the goal. Like, promise, like this is for you too. And once you almost kind of find yourself in calls going against your own positioning, and reassuring people that this product is a great fit for you. So we've built it like, your job title might not be, developer relations, or developer success, but like the way you want to use it and the value that you get from it is 100% match. I think that for me, if that's happening consistently, and importantly, with a consistent persona, it's not like, 100 different people with totally different needs tell you that, but like you speak to 10 people in a row and they're all very, very similar in what they need from your product, but they're all outside your current sort of definition. If you start seeing that consistency, I think that's kind of when that like now is that fork in the road where either you stay focused for longer, or you change your focus, right? It's not actually losing the focus. It's just like you move on. So I think that for me was a big sort of test.
100%. Right. This is also a very tangible example as to why as a CEO and founder of a company, you should never be too far away from sales and talking to your customers. But like that said now, right? So when you then, so you switch over to a much bigger, more ambitious vision, but in a space that is, if you look at it without too much context, seems incredibly crowded. It's a hard thing to avoid, to just being yet another Me Too product that isn't as mature as some of the other companies yet. So maybe to make it a little bit more tangible, can you explain what collaboration means and how that's different? Because right, as someone who doesn't understand the space very well, I could argue that emailing with someone that gets back to me fast is also to a degree collaboration, because that person helps me figure out how I can solve my problem. So can you explain to me like what collaboration means in a way that within customer support that isn't the collaboration that I'm thinking of right now?
So I think the first thing is there's a recognition in the collaborative product. I think there's a recognition that like support isn't just being done by the support team, but it's genuinely a team sport that touches the entire company. So when we talk about collaboration, right, what we think about is, and when we build this into a product, what we think about very, very much is the support team in your company might be, say, 5 people. That support team depends on the engineers in your company, right, to fix a bug, unblock a customer, release a new feature, turn on a feature flag, you name it. How does that happen today? And typically, my guess is the way it happens is you talk to a customer in like your tool of choice, exchange an email with them, and then you realize, okay, like they need something fixed or there's an issue here. Let me go and figure out let me go and ask an engineering team channel to see if anyone can help. And you start like a Slack conversation there, and maybe eventually someone gets back to you and go like, oh, so who's the customer? and then go back into the Zendesk and like you copy the details and then kind of go like, cool, like here's the ID, and then you go back to them. And then again, the engineer goes like, cool, I'll take a look at it tomorrow morning. And then like, in the meantime, because it's Slack, like 100 more threads happen. Then tomorrow morning, you set yourself a reminder and kind of go like, okay, like I need to follow up on this. Where was it again? It was in this channel or that channel? Oh, it was in this channel. Great. So you find it. No one's gotten back to you. It hasn't happened. Now you have to chase. That's one thread. It's one ticket. Multiply that average support load, 200 tickets a day, 300 tickets a day, where like 20% need some kind of escalation. And suddenly there's a whole workflow there that is becoming really painful. Like I've spoken to customers who have built integrations into Salesforce where every 24 hours, a case in Salesforce reopens automatically with a trigger to remind them to go and check in the engineering team channel whether or not the escalated like issue or bug has been resolved. Right? Like every 24 hours, no matter if something's happened or not, like every 24 hours to get a reminder. Imagine that across like a few thousand cases. So suddenly like there's that whole workflow that you can power that we power, right? Like it's really the internal collaboration of helping you converse better with the engineering team, like handle the conversation for you. So make it really easy to like launch Slack conversations from within plane without leaving plane that had full context of the issue summarized for the team. Then you have to go in the plane in Slack to like get a sense of like what the bug is about or what the issue might be. Once the like discussion's over, we automatically bring it back into your queue and we kind of go like, hey, like this discussion's now resolved. The engineer like giving the thumbs up, you can go ahead and do, let the customer know. Same for like issue tracker integrations. We have super deep integrations with issue trackers that every team uses. So like there's a lot of like sort of things like that you can start to build that really are like, sort of the second half of the battle. By like first half of the battle is like talking to customers. The other half is chasing your team internally, making sure things get done. So we power that, right? So that's a big focus collaboration wise. I think the second one is collaboration with the customer, where again, like today, yes, email is probably still the dominant channel, but I mean, we've seen customers that like have moved to us and moved their like first response time from 3 hours on email to 3 minutes in Slack, just by like having their whole team there, right? But like doing that at scale, really hard to do. We make all of that super easy. So again, like we help you manage like Slack and collaborative channels like that at a scale that like previously wasn't possible. So I think these are sort of two of the more tangible ways in which we can think about collaboration.
That makes a lot of sense. Right now, having understood what collaboration means, what all, right, as you kind of rethought your positioning and changed it away from the generic B2B word, what were maybe some of the other ideas that you had that made the top of the list, besides collaboration, that are maybe more specific than a fairly generic word like collaboration? Why did you then actually choose collaboration as a word that, right, a lot of people can probably misuse as still for it to be the word that you want to describe yourself with?
I think the first test is it has to be something that you can actually deliver on, right? So one of the words that we looked at was like, are we a customer platform? Because our vision really is to like, we are the system of record already for like customer communication. What can you do on top of customer communication? What can you do once you have a message from a customer? What signal is embedded in that? It's like feedback, there's churn signal, there's happiness, there's like renewal opportunities, like all these things are things, there's feedback, the product feedback and whatever they can like leverage and extract. There's all these things you can build on top of it that are really interesting. So really the best way to describe it is a customer platform, right? Like that's an established thing, but that's the vision. We're not there yet. So you can't say that yet. So customer platform for us was off the table for that reason. Firstly, second, customer platform was the first word that we kind of looked at. Second one was sort of a bit more focused, like trying to preserve like the technical component of what we were doing and trying to speak more to, sort of product-led support. So trying to broaden out a bit from like just the technical aspect and kind of call ourselves like the customer support platform for product-led support or product-led companies or something in that kind of context. What we didn't like there was when you say product-led, customer-led. And when you're selling customer support software, it's just like, it doesn't feel right to say, to go to someone whose whole job is to talk to customers, and we care deeply about this. And going like, oh, we're for product-led support, like that should feel a bit like we don't care about customers. But also define product-led for me, like, what isn't everyone product-led in some way? But also customer-led, like it's many companies are product-led. B2C companies could be product-led, like enterprises are product-led. Like it's great. Like you're not going to sell the CPG companies anytime soon, right? So it's vague. So we dismissed that, and then we just kind of went through like this process of like, what do we feel really strongly about? And we just feel really strongly that like support should not be siloed. So then what's the best way of describing that? Well, collaboration, because support should work together with all the other disciplines in the company. So it comes from like, I think, a very strongly held belief, I think, that we have.
What's the hardest part about changing your positioning? Because you've done it so many times now.
Maybe too many times, yeah.
Yeah.
I think specificity is the hardest part. It's only just the emotional part, right? Of like, it feels like you kind of a bit like a phoenix type process, right? A bit like, you're burning the thing down and then you're like rising from the ashes type vibe. And I think that's like, it's emotionally hard because we're like, I quite like what we have, but also it's no longer right. So that's difficult. But I think beyond that, the specificity of making sure that like whatever you say, like if you imagine like a homepage, right? Like as you scroll further down, that really is backed up by what you do and what the product does. And the most powerful thing someone said to me was, you can repackage every product in probably a dozen different ways. Like the exact same features that work the exact same way, you can describe all of them in 12 different ways that make entirely different products for entirely different purposes. And I really believe that's true. And so I think when you look at like every feature, right? Like we could talk about ourselves as like the customer system of record. Same features. We can talk about ourselves as like the customer collaboration platform. Same features. You just highlight different things. And I think sort of making sure that like you're really consistent, you really go through the list of like, okay, what's the overall thing that we're saying, and what's the umbrella, and then has the umbrella break down into different features, and how do we explain the benefit of those features? It's not just like, Command K, it's super fast. You're gonna love the UI. That's meaningless. Like, why do you care about Command K? Like, what's the next level down? Like, what does it help you do? Oh, it helps me faster. Interesting. Okay. How does speed manifest? Okay, it's first response time. Great. Now we have a business metric. And really dropping to like that level of like, this tool will help you speed up your customer responses, which in turn improves revenue and retention, right? Like, and but really kind of like, and then putting a collaboration angle on that, and kind of like collaborative support is faster because internally, like you spend less time chasing things around and making sure you get responses so you can get back to customers faster so that your retention improves. It's like really like going through like dropping like the third level, sort of detail down, really get into the core of like, what is it exactly, and how exactly does it work? I think that's like, takes a lot of mental energy, I think, to like do that well.
What do you advise founders that are currently going through the process of challenging, upgrading, or changing their own positioning, if you had to leave them with something?
I would say, firstly, like as I mentioned earlier, I think sort of separate company vision and company pitch from product pitch. And make sure like they can't be the same. The only companies where are the same are like the companies you'll know of, like Segment, Twilio, whatever, right? Like Stripe. Like Stripe actually says they increase the GDP of the internet, like because at this point they've built such a wide suite of product that actually lets them do that, right? And they have the reach that lets them do that. So don't look at that as your model of like how to explain what you do to customers.
It's well over
I think that's the first thing.
It's well over a decade in the making in their case, since eventually
exactly right. Like that's end game, really. Like that's once you have the market, then you can talk like that. But you have to earn that. But I think beyond that, like I would probably say, be really clear on why each bit of your homepage. I focus a lot of time on like our homepage just because I think it's your shopping window. It says it's the most concise version. Like once someone lands there, like that explains what you do. Really make sure that like everything on there deserves to be there and has a strong reason to be there. And the reason I say that is because when you think about your positioning, it's very easy to get attached to vanity, sort of like vanity things, right? Like everyone talks about like our super fast UI, like 100 milliseconds, and like MLK and all these sorts of features. And they typically don't need to be there. They just are trying to signal that like you're a modern product, but like the modern product should still solve a problem. So, what's the problem that you're solving, and like how does that exact feature like relate to the problem that you're solving? So I think just like draw that like that connection every single time. Like Command K, your keyboard shortcuts, like all that stuff that like every startup has to talk about, like doesn't need to be there. Like that's not why some people will sign up, but that's vanity. Like that's token product market fit. Doesn't actually exist. People sign because it looks shiny and cool. Doesn't actually do anything. Like beyond that, like what's the actual thing that people are going to get from it? So just make sure you draw that connection every single time.
Now, maybe independent of positioning, what popular advice that is often given to startup founders or operators do you disagree with, and why?
This is maybe very high context, but I strongly believe that there's oftentimes the prevailing wisdom way of saying like, talk to customers, build what they want, talk to customers, build what they want. And I think you should do like 60, 70% of that. The other 30%, I believe this very, very strongly, is like, talk to customers, think, like, let it like digest, like see where that's going. Like where does that lead you? And then build the thing that you want. And the reason I say this is because it's very, very easy in large markets to get stuck in a situation where you build the thing that's right in front of you and you miss the higher order shift. There's a great article I once read about Dropbox and how Dropbox's existential threat was that they were built for files, right? So like if you like, I don't know anyone on Dropbox, like maybe this is horribly unfair, but from the outside looking in, right, it feels like there's a whole generation of companies around file sharing and like file syncing. And all of them rely on like the idea that like files are a thing. And suddenly along comes Google Docs and Figma. And they go like, what are files?
Yeah.
We don't have files. Files don't exist. And suddenly you've built your entire product on something that's basically made irrelevant by like a higher order shift. And like, of course, like, there's gonna be a segment of customers. Dropbox is a great business, like doing really, really well. Like there's a segment that like doesn't work in a file-less way, and you can position and so on, but like that shift is happening. So I think just make sure that like, sort of that you're not always just like building for like the thing that's on top of like the primitive or the assumption that you've based the whole company on, but that you also question those assumptions a bit and kind of go like, what's the next higher order shift that's going to happen to us? And for us, that's AI. We could spend the next 2 years building the most like beautiful UI for responding to people, for humans responding to people. And then along comes AI and kind of goes like, well, hold on a second, like AI agents are now pretty good at that as well. What are you doing on that side? So I think just make sure you stay on top of that.
And then the last question, for someone who is thinking about starting a company or has just started their company, what's the one piece of advice you'd leave that person with?
Define how it is that you work and how you work best and what you need in order to succeed. Try and sort of design your environment in a way that like gives you that. And I say that because like for me, like I thrive in the pressure. So the thing I've set on my board is like, I want you to push me extremely hard. Like I want you to like raise the expectations and go like, Simon, not good enough. Like, gotta grow faster. because that's how I know I will think more on like, okay, cool, how can I grow faster? And I'll think about things I wouldn't otherwise think about. And just write that down. Like, just write it down. Like, write yourself a Notion doc and kind of like, here's how I work best. Work on that with a coach. Get a coach and like think through these sort of things together. And there might be some things that you need to change in order to succeed in your role. You need to evolve as a person. But there'll also be lots of other things where just knowing that and knowing like what you need from others around you will help you succeed. So I think that for me has been very valuable.
That's awesome. And with founders telling investors to push them further is every investor's dream. So I'm sure you are very excited about that. And that's also a great place to end. So thank you so much for joining today. This was phenomenal.
This was lots of fun. Thank you so much.